It is June 13th, 2025, and Israel and the US have just carried out an unprecedented attack against Iran, targeting nuclear facilities and ballistic missile factories, but also carrying out a number of targeted assassinations against some of Iran's top military commanders. And the Trump administration just went from acting as though they wanted to talk with Iran, that they wanted some sort of a deal, to Trump now coming out in the open and saying, hey, Israel used our weapons against Iran. We warned Iran that all of this is Iran's fault, that the US is completely involved in this attack, which essentially means that the US is now declaring war on Iran. But why are they doing this when even Trump's own director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, testified that the US has no evidence that Iran is planning to create a nuclear weapon, when Iran is not posing a direct threat to Israel? And yet you have the media here in the US parroting this claim that Israel is simply launching preemptive strikes. Well, we got into the reason why these attacks are happening and why they have been years, even decades in the making, with a special guest earlier. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Brian Berletic, a geopolitical analyst, former U.S. Marine, and host of the New Atlas. Brian, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you so much for having me back, even though it's a little bit earlier than I would have liked.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and I'm glad that I get a chance to talk to you, because you are one of the very few people out there who has called this, warned us that this was going to happen, and now we're seeing it happening. Israel has launched an unprecedented attack on Iran. It's still continuing to attack Iran. I know there's a lot of breaking news updates still coming in, with wide-scale strikes that Israel has said targeted nuclear facilities, ballistic missile factories, and military commanders. So we saw kind of what was expected, which was this attack. We also saw a number of assassinations targeting Iran's top military command. So will you start by kind of taking me through how you see this attack? Were you surprised by the sheer scale of what Israel carried out?
Well, I think it's a misnomer to say this is an Israeli attack. It was carried out by Israeli planes and pilots. At least that's what we were being told. But there's absolutely no possible way Israel carried out any aspect of this operation without complete and absolute support from the United States. That would have had to have spanned both at least the Biden administration and the Trump administration. So this is bipartisan. The United States, both administrations, supported Israel in preparing for this operation. This is not something that you put together overnight. This took months, if not longer, to put together, possibly even years. Not only that, the United States has been preparing the region for years, many years, from the Obama administration all the way up until this second term of the Trump administration, preparing the ground for this very opportunity. We have to remember it was under the Obama administration, all the way back in 2011, the so-called Arab Spring. The U.S. engineered that, precipitated multiple wars in the region, specifically attacking Syria, a very close ally of Iran, but also Ansar Allah in Yemen. And that was the beginning of this process of dismantling Iran's network of allies in the region. And we remember the Obama administration signing the nuclear deal with Iran. And I've warned people before it was even signed. I said, this is in U.S. policy papers. Pretend to make a deal with Iran. Use it as cover to distance yourself from an unprovoked attack carried out by U.S. proxies, Israel. This is what I have warned about literally for years and years. And that is exactly what has happened now. We remember the Trump administration, the first term in office, unilaterally withdrew from this deal, killed senior military commander General Qasem Soleimani. There was an act of war against Iran, unprovoked. General Qasem Soleimani was fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they killed him. And then under the Trump administration, we remember maximum pressure in attempts to collapse the Iranian government. And then under 4 years of Biden, Toward the end of his term, Syria collapsed. Its entire air defense network, very formidable integrated air defense network, completely destroyed, clearing this corridor Israel is now using right now as we speak to repeatedly bomb targets all across Iran. So this was continuity of agenda spanning many years, over a decade, preparing the ground for this war with Iran. And people who are making excuses, sorry to go on for so long, but I'm so frustrated and angry. Not that the US is doing this is completely expected, but the cognitive dissonance and delusion and denial among so many people. They literally wrote this in a policy paper, point by point by point, and then went down the list and implemented every single one of the policies they laid out. It's a policy paper that is publicly available, free to download for anyone to read. And people, I know I personally sent this to every single person that I know, and almost nobody has read it. Or at least they haven't mentioned it since. And they laid this all out, and now they are doing literally what they wrote in this policy paper. So it wasn't a lucky guess. It wasn't some complex process of analysis that I used to figure this out. They literally just wrote it down on a piece of paper, and I read it. So now, spanning all of these years, preparing the ground, now they're carrying this out. But this isn't about Iran. A lot of people are laser focused, obsessed with Israel and their hatred toward Israel. Not that Israel hasn't done things to deserve people's scorn, but this isn't about just Iran. This is about eliminating a pillar of multipolarism to further isolate both Russia, with whom the US is also pursuing fake negotiations with, and also ultimately China. We have US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and the rest of President Trump's neocon warmongering cabinet talking about how we need a division of labor. We need to divide up all of these regions. We're at war, proxy war with these adversaries of ours, these peer or near peer competitors. And we need to do strategic sequencing. We need to deal with China first and then circle back around to Russia. And in between, we will get Iran. And I'm not sure if it was on your program or maybe it was another program that I've done recently, but I was asked, do you think they're going to do Iran first before China? And I said, most likely, because you will be disrupting the flow of hydrocarbons to the Chinese economy, weakening China's position, making it much better for the US to pursue the very same type of hostilities with China that it is already involved in, either directly or by proxy against Russia and Iran.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think that it's important to look at that bigger picture, right? Because you're right. A lot of people get kind of locked into this Israel versus Iran, and they don't realize exactly as you were saying there, this has been years in the making, right? And I know we've all been kind of paying attention to what President Trump has been saying. He has been talking a lot, and the fact that, he went from just a few hours before this attack, getting on Truth Social and saying, we remain committed to a diplomatic resolution to the Iran nuclear issue. And it's like, well, clearly not. And I don't think that was ever the case. To now, Trump has just kicked plausible deniability out the window, and he's fully on board, right? And he's on Truth Social threatening Iran, saying, oh, we warned you, the US makes the best and most lethal military equipment anywhere in the world by far. And so I'm looking at these statements and just going, oh, okay, the US is completely on board. I mean, when it comes to just how involved the US is it safe to say that the US is now openly at war with Iran, or has it been this way for a very long time now?
This was always a U.S. war. Israel was created in the first place, first as a forward operating base for the British Empire, and then when the Americans assumed British primacy over the globe, it became a forward operating base for the United States and its interests in the region. And absolutely everything Israel is doing is enabled by the U.S. And like you said, President Trump just said they're doing it with U.S. weapons that we gave them, which is a mystery to no one. We all know that, including under the Trump administration, billions and billions of dollars of money and weapons constantly flow to Israel. All of their military operations, whether it's genocide in Gaza or these unprovoked unilateral strikes on, not really unilateral because it is U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran, but all of this is made possible by the U.S. And if two points I want to really make clear to people will say, because even though President Trump has literally said to Iran, if you don't fully capitulate, this is going to happen again. Israel will attack you again with our weapons that we gave them to attack you. The U.S. should not have been talking to Iran in the first. There shouldn't have been any negotiations in the first place. If President Trump really was committed to peace and ending all of the endless wars that he said he would end on the campaign trail, he would not even have made Iran an issue, because it's none of America's business. Its nuclear program is the business of the UN and the organizations and institutions that are assigned to mind that. And only if the UN authorizes the US to get involved can the US get involved, and it didn't. So they were doing that on their own. And the reason they were doing it was to create this pretext, this opportunity, also this distance between themselves and Israel, who carried it out. They wanted to make it look as if they were trying to pursue diplomacy and the Israelis just did this on their own. That was always the plan. I'm looking at the Brookings Institution 2009 paper, which Path to Persia, it's open right now on my desktop, talking about diplomacy. And they admit in the paper, the whole point of diplomacy is to create plausible deniability for when Israel carries out the strike on Iran. So the US could say, we wanted diplomacy, Israel did this, we were offering the Iranians an opportunity, and they rejected it, and they brought this upon themselves. It literally says that they're trying to convince the international community that the Iranians brought it upon themselves by refusing a very good deal. Literally, I just read that right off the policy papers. That is what just happened. We're still going to have people denying this, creating excuses for the Trump administration. As I had warned, this is absolute uninterrupted continuity of agenda. The Trump administration did exactly what the Biden administration did. The Trump administration, the Obama administration picked up right where the previous administration left off. They're going to continue pursuing primacy. There are no spheres of influence the U.S. seeks to create and allow other nations to establish. There is no accommodation. There are no negotiations. These were all ploys, and now we can see what the ploys were designed to do and lead to.
Yeah, and it's crazy exactly as you're laying it out there. It's like, and I know that we've talked about this before, even some of the ways in which you've been warning in recent months. Hey, yeah, this policy paper was written in 2009, but Trump literally just followed, I mean, his administration as a whole just followed it, right? It's textbook Trump coming out and saying, oh, well, I gave Iran 60 days, and guess what? It's the 61st day. And now this attack had to be carried out because they didn't agree to a deal, even though the deal that the US was offering them started out as something that they may agree to. And then all of a sudden the US comes in and it's like, nope, there will be no uranium enrichment whatsoever, knowing that Tehran is not going to agree to that and should not agree to that. Now, I want to get into kind of what we're learning about this attack just a little bit and the significance of it, because you've got this report from the Times of Israel. Of course, Israel's now coming out and bragging that Mossad agents set up a drone base on Iranian soil near Tehran, that the drones were activated overnight, striking surface-to-surface missile launchers aimed at Israel. And kind of as you were saying there, talking about all of the ways in which the US has targeted Syria, what do you think is the goal here when it comes to targeting Iran and really getting inside the country, literally, but going after their military command, as we've seen? What is kind of the overall goal when it comes to these attacks?
The ultimate goal or desire of the United States is either regime change or creating a failed dysfunctional state in Iran, and then using Iran as a springboard into Russia, into the rest of Eurasia, and further encircling both Russia and China. That is the ultimate goal. And I had warned that both Russia and Iran's inability to stop the collapse of Syria signaled obvious weakness and the overextension of both nations, and Iran more so than Russia. Russia is obviously involved in Ukraine and has prioritized that. Iran is right there in the region, and they were unable to stop the collapse of the Syrian government, which indicated much greater weakness than I think a lot of people realize. And that was a warning sign. And I warned people that between the elimination of Syria's integrated air defenses, Iran's inability to preserve the government in Damascus, all of this made made it clear that Iran was weaker now than it ever had been before, and this would be exploited by the United States and its proxies in the region. That is exactly what they have done. So we saw the collapse of Syria at the end of last year. That is also when Israel carried out decapitation strikes against Hezbollah, and then upon taking office, the Trump administration began waging war against Ansar Allah in Yemen. It was a coordinated region-wide war on Iran's allies. And now the war is being directed at Iran itself. And I'm sure no matter what Iran said or did during these negotiations, their goal, I think, was to just delay for as long as possible. They knew no matter what they agreed to, if they agreed to everything, the U.S. would say they violated it. We have secret information that they violated it, and they would have bombed them anyway. So it was just a lose-lose situation for Iran. It's not Iran's fault. They have been sanctioned, encircled, undermined, attacked for decades and decades and decades. And they have done the best they could with what they have. It's far from over. They've eliminated these senior leaders, but there's a chain of command. There's continuity of agenda in Iran as well. They have a lot of military capabilities preserved. I think people are expecting some sort of massive retaliation against Israel, but all of these military capabilities Iran had were primarily designed to deter this from happening. Now that it has happened, what are they going to achieve except making people on the internet feel emotionally satisfied through temporary, short-lived feeling of retribution? It's a very we're at the edge of a very dangerous precipice, and a lot of this is going to be decided upon by what the multipolar world does in response to this. The U.S. is going to get away with this, and then they're going to do the exact same thing to Russia and China to a greater degree. It's inevitable.
Yeah, and that's got to be the biggest warning sign. I mean, exactly as you're noting there, because even just looking at kind of comparing this to what we saw with the targeting of Hezbollah back in September, October, and the fact that now you have these latest strikes are targeting Iran's major general, the head of their Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as well as their chief of staff and several other commanders and nuclear scientists on top of that. Now you have Israel coming out and saying, oh, this attack is going to be, they're making it sound like this is going to be a, days long, if not weeks long attack. Clearly the US is on board and directly involved in that, right? In directing that attack on their end. And I know that we have heard from at least Russia. I was looking at the Russian Foreign Ministry's statement. They said that they strongly condemn the latest attacks on Iran, noting that unprovoked military strikes against a sovereign UN member state, its citizens, sleeping peaceful cities, and nuclear energy infrastructure facilities are categorically unacceptable. And it's been a tough position to be in, because we've seen the ways in which there is an ongoing genocide that is being live streamed right before all of our eyes in Gaza, and the international community, international law as a whole, has not been able to do anything to stop it, let alone any of the various other attacks that have been carried out in the region by Israel and the US. So when you look at the position that we're in right now, what are those concerns when it comes to what countries like Russia and China are capable of doing or even willing to do? Because as we've talked about before, when the US is looking at containing Russia, they're doing this on purpose, right? They're creating all of these different conflicts and all of this chaos on purpose to put Russia in a position where it's so busy in Ukraine that it can't really do anything else or help any of its other allies.
Absolutely. This goes back to U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, his division of labor in Europe, in the Middle East, in the Asia Pacific region, and also strategic sequencing that he has now brought up twice now in major public statements, back in February in Europe, and more recently, just at the end of last month in Singapore at the Shangri-La Dialogue, where he basically put a bookend on his previous comments, saying, we have Europe taking care of Ukraine and Russia right now, so that we neglected Asia for a generation. Now we're going to focus our attention, which means burn the whole place down. That's what they mean, because that's what they did for a generation elsewhere. So what is Russia and China going to do? You explained it perfectly. The U.S. deliberately has extended Russia first preventing them from being able to preserve the government in Syria, and now Iran is being dismembered right now, and it's just only time is going to tell whether they're successful or not. The ability for Russia to significantly aid Iran is non-existent. They cannot. Iran is assisting Russia in their war with NATO in Ukraine, and China also. They're all looking at the very big picture and the end game. And so, just like when you're playing a game of chess, and not to reduce this to a board game, but just to help people understand, you have a number of pieces and you have to make difficult decisions. You cannot keep them all the way to the end of the game if you're playing against a capable player. So you have to pick and choose which ones you're going to keep at the end and which ones you're going to have to give up. Syria is a piece that has already been given up. Libya was a piece that had already been given up. And now Iran is sitting here. It was the weakest link among the three pillars of multipolarism the US has been targeting. And it's not looking very good. It's not looking good at all. And like you said, there's not much Russia and China can do. But Russia and China and the rest of the emerging multipolar world need to look at what just happened and realize this is how the US is going to deal with them in turn. This is, when I say strategic sequencing, that is defeating all of these targeted US nations in detail so the US doesn't have to fight them at the same time. And they didn't want to fight the US right now because they did not want to escalate. But the failure to unite against the US now has allowed yet another nation to be taken off the board. Well, it's not done yet, but again, it's not looking good. So this is something we'll have to wait and see what the Russian and Chinese governments actually do. This directly affects them and bodes ill for them.
Oh, absolutely. And now when it comes to some of the discourse that we've seen online, it's always interesting to me. A lot of people, they come out and they're critical of Iran, right? They say that, oh, it's a paper tiger, that it should have done more, that it should have been the one launching more attacks targeting Israel. I know that there were reports that Iran launched over 100 drones, that all of them were intercepted by Israel, the US, and company. But when it comes to Iran's capabilities, I mean, I know what you're laying out there is kind of bleak, right? This idea that, okay, they're putting off this attack for as long as possible. Obviously, that they're doing everything that they can on their end. But even in this growing multipolar world, the US still has a certain amount of power and a certain amount of ways in which it can still target these countries. And it has worked for years in order to plan all of this to get us to this point. So how do you view Iran, the position that it's in? Is there anything that it could have done to avoid the attacks that just happened and are still occurring?
Not really. I mean, what could they have done? People say you should have launched all your missiles at Israel. All that would have done is give Israel and the United States an excuse to do all of this sooner. And to do it to a much greater degree right now, as it is, and the U.S. policy papers all the way back from 2009 worried about this, that Iran would be very measured in its response, and it would make the U.S. and Israel look exactly like what they are, the aggressors, carrying out an unjustified unilateral strike on a sovereign nation for no real reason at all. And the excuse that Iran might be getting nuclear weapons when we know Israel has nuclear weapons, the U.S. has nuclear weapons and has actually used them against another nation, that doesn't fly. That's not an acceptable excuse. That's not a good enough reason. For some people, maybe, but for most of the world, I think not. So right now, the U.S. and Israel are showing their true colors. The mask is falling off. Only the most delusional people are going to continue to try to make excuses for the Trump administration at this point. I hope that's a very, very small number of people. I hope this is a huge wake-up call. I hope they look at what happened, all of the information that was available before this happened, to warn people that this was what was going to happen. I hope they're awake now and they're listening, and they realize that the negotiations with Russia are the exact same game being played again. And there is no intention to accommodate or coexist with China either. This is all zero, for the US, zero sum. They're fighting for their primacy. They will burn the planet down in its pursuit if they cannot get it.
Yeah, very, very telling. I mean, it's right there, and I know that in a lot of ways it can feel bleak to look at the current situation that we're in. But I really appreciate the work that you're doing and have been doing, trying to not only warn people but also wake them up to a lot of what we're seeing right now. And I appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down and to educate us on the latest here. Brian Berletic, a geopolitical analyst, former U.S. Marine, and host of the New Atlas. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also catch Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.